For this demonstration of the We Are Memory Keepers template studio, I'm doing a gift bag. And I'm going to use some of the We Are Memory Keeper designer poster board, and this is the really nice shiny gold poster board. And we only have one sheet of this, so on the gift bag sizing guide, I'm going to do the largest one you can do with one piece of paper. So I'm going to need a 25 by 14 inch piece of paper, and that's going to let me make a 7 by 5 by 10.5 bag. If you do the larger sizes, you actually have to use two pieces of paper and adhere those together. And if you saw our unboxing video, we showed the yellow and green bag I made there, where I made the largest size possible, which was a 17 by 7 by 17.5. So, like I said, for this one, doing the third up from the bottom, and I can do that with one sheet of 25 by 14. So the first thing I need to do is cut this to size, and poster board is 22 by 28, so I need to cut some off and then cut this at 14 inches. So for the cutting, I'm going to use the straight edges, and for the horizontal, I'm using the B and the C, and just putting those together. And when you're cutting horizontally, there's the arrows on the end of the tool, and you want those to be to the top, so I'm putting those in at 14. Then just making sure I've got everything lined up. And in the previous unboxing and the envelope demo, I mentioned how I like to keep it on the inside of the thick teal line that goes around the outside. And then the gray is the cutting, and this rotates, so there's a guide, and I just make sure that goes within the ridge of the bar. And I mentioned in the envelope guide, a tip is to kind of stand up when you're cutting. I find if I'm sitting, I have a tendency to push against the bar, and the bar does flex a little, so that gives you a curved cut. So standing up and making sure I'm applying downward pressure helps make sure that I'm not bending the bar or flexing it while I'm cutting. And I mentioned that the blade is very sharp right now, and you don't really have to apply a ton of pressure to cut through. And even after that talk, I did still push a little, so it flexed the bar just a little bit. So I'm going to see if I can straighten that out a little. And this time I'm just kind of holding the bar in place as I go. And that did help straighten it out. So I'm done with the horizontal cutting, so I can take this away. There's that extra little strip I cut. It was a little too tentative, and it didn't cut all the way through right at the edge here. So I'm just folding it over, giving it a little tug. So that's at 14 inches, and then I need 14 by 25. So I just have to do a vertical cut, and for that I'm switching over. I believe it's the A and B. Yep, the A and B. And when you're cutting vertically, you want to make sure that the arrows are to the right. So I'm putting in the arrows into 25 and then securing those. The head has 3 pins to go into the holes for the notches, so that helps secure it. So I'm just making sure I'm lined up right inside those dark teal lines. So that's 25. And again, I was a little too tentative, but a little flexing and that popped off clean that time. So now, I mentioned we got 2 books, and I don't know if that's intentional. The box only shows 1. But it's really nice having 2 books because you can keep the sizing open for all the references, especially with the gift bags. There's a lot of measurements you need to work with. And then you have one that you can easily follow along with the instructions. So the paper was cut to size, and now the instructions, number 4, say to align the lower left corner of the paper to 1 inch. So that's aligned. And then you take the gift bag guide and do it with the first cut in the gift placement, the gift bag guide placement. So for that, it's a 0. So there's an arrow on the guide, and I just plug this in at 0. And again, I just have a slight curve where my cut was, so I'm just making the best of that. So this is at 0, which is the first measurement, and then you just cut the notch. And this one's a little bit different from the straight edges or from the curve that I was using when I was making envelopes. It only goes up part way on one side and then it goes up all the way on the other. And then that little notch comes right out. So we move down to the next measurement, which, looking at the sheet, is 7. So I come over and put the guide with the arrow into 7 and cut the notch. And I mentioned that the handle swings when you're cutting, and I found that it's important to go with the full motion of the curve and the swing. So I'm starting making sure I'm all the way to my left, and then bringing it up and continuing the kind of curve and twist of the blade at the end. So that way it ensures that everything meets up with the notch. And the next one is 12. And then 19. And then the last one is 24. And this one, I'm only getting that little corner that's left. create the final flap. So now we're going on to step 7, and you use the horizontal score using the B and C. So just bringing those back together. And you do this at the B and C scoring guide, which back on the sheet is 18.5. So flip this around because I need the arrows at the top, and I plug this into 18.5. And then the teal is the scoring tool. And this glitter paper is a little bit heavier as far as the scoring. The glitter absorbs kind of part of the scoring, so I'm just making sure I'm going over that with a little bit of force. And now step 8 is you vertically score the paper by aligning the arrows of the A and B scoring guide to the A and B scoring measurements. And those are going to match up with the vertical cuts on the notches we were making. And I shifted that a little, so just making sure I'm back on the 1 inch. So the first is 2. So since I'm doing vertical, I'm making sure my arrows are to the right and putting that in the 2. And just giving that a little bit of a better alignment because my curved edge is throwing me off a little. So one thing you don't want to fuss about is eyeballing it here. This score line isn't against the edge, and that's because you don't want it to be on the edge, because it is a little bit distance away from the edge of the scoring line. So even though it doesn't look like it's going to line up, it's going to be just fine when I actually score. And then the next measurement is 9. Then the next measurement is 11.5. And for this one, you can see in the instructions, it's not good for you to see, but in the instructions it's showing the dotted lines, and in the first cases it was lining up with the flap. Now with this smaller flap on the side, it wants us to score all the way to the bottom, and that's because these smaller ones are going to be the sides of the bag, and they're going to kind of fold in a little, and you'll see that when we put it together. So for these, I'm scoring all the way across the entire paper. So going back, next measurement is 14. And it is important to pay attention to what line you're on and what you're working with. So if you find it hard to track across the paper, especially if you're working towards the middle, you might want to get a post-it note or some guide to help you make sure you're on the right line. I messed up some paper starting out because I was a little sick and a little foggy, and I messed up one of the measurements. So now I'm on 14 and I'm back on the flap here. And then next one is 21. And this is actually very quick work when you're not talking through every step. And then the last one is 23.5. And again, this is going on the smaller flap. So this one I'm scoring the entire length. So now, with everything done, we can go on. Step 9 is you have to do a little bit of extra cutting by hand. If you're doing a larger bag where the notch doesn't reach up to the horizontal score line, you then have to cut up that notch a little bit to meet that score line with your scissors. And then on the very last edge, which is actually this edge here, the smaller, where we're going to be folding things over, you want to cut out just a little bit of a notch. Get up a little bit better from the score line over, and then at the top to the score line. That just helps when you're folding things over. You have just a nice little tab when you're folding over your bag. So now you're going to fold your edges over. Give everything a good fold on the scores, just so it's ready to go together. And right now, this is the smaller flap that kind of folds in, so I was giving that a little bit of a different score. And again, this one kind of goes in on the side of the bag, so I'm folding this in the opposite direction. So I can have this lay flat for now, and then this is going to be adhered underneath. So I've got the tape glider. So we're just hopping into a part that I'm re-recording because the original was off camera, so now we've adjusted the camera a little, and you'll be able to see me putting the bag together a little bit better. So previously I'd been using the tape glider, and I'm going to continue using that, but with the glitter paper, a better choice might be the terrifically tacky tape from Provocraft. It's just super adhesive, and will probably do a better job if you're actually using this to give a gift in. So, you want to glue the side panel shut. So that's actually going to be folding it over. We've got our little tab here, and that's just simply going to be folding it over and adhering that. So I'm going to put some more adhesive down. And just lining up the edge as well. Smoothing that down. So now it'll pop into that box shape with the flaps for my bag. So now fold in the smaller flaps, and then fold in the larger flap. I'm just going to put a little more of the tape down on this side. And then just reach to give it some good pressure. So there's the gift bag all set up, and you're ready to put your handles on. So for this part, I had already put the handle in the previous video on this side, so I'm going to work on this side. All you need is a blade. I'm using a box cutter, but you could use a regular X-Acto or anything like that. So you're just going to put some notches for your ribbon. And this cutter is very, very dull. So all I'm doing is eyeballing this just to keep it relatively on the same line. I'm just putting a notch, like wiggled it, just to give it a little more space for the ribbon to go through. And then I cut a length of ribbon, and in the instructions they kind of make it look like you could just punch the two ends through and then tie a knot at each end. And that can work out, but if you're doing anything really heavy, what I found works better is doing something that's kind of twice the length of what you want it to be, and then tying it together. So I'm going to do it that way. So I have my two notches, and I'm just feeding the ribbon through. Sometimes you might have to use your blade to help push things through. And then making sure my ribbon's not twisted around before I put it through the hole. Make sure it's a nice even loop. Might have to use the blade on this one. So now with it pushed through inside the bag, I can just tie a knot here. Just making sure it's nice and tight. And then just pull the ribbon back through, and there's your handle. And the benefit of this is it really evens out the pressure inside the bag, so you're not going to really rip out those holes. Another thing you can do is, if you had a scrap of the poster board, you could cut a size just to add a little extra reinforcement where you're going to put the handles, and cut through both layers, and that will give you a little extra reinforcement where the ribbon's going through the bag so it doesn't pull through the paper of the bag itself. So there you go, you're all set.